Hi, so in this session we're going to look at color calibration of screens. So basically this is where we're going to get our screens that we're working on, our displays where we're going to be working in retouching or perhaps video editing or maybe graphic design. And we're going to get them into an international standard. And the idea here is that if everybody works to the same standard, i.e. their screens are calibrated so they show images, colours to the same extent, to the same style as every other screen that's calibrated as well, then if I look at an image, if I do some work on it, and I then send that image to somebody else who's working on a calibrated screen, it'll appear the same. And likewise with video and designs. So in order to do this, we're going to be using a device. Now this is a Spyder5 calibrator from Datacolor. It's the new device from the market leaders in screen calibration, which is Datacolor. And effectively this device plugs into the USB port of your computer, both Mac or PC. You then download software when you get the device, basically, and that puts you on the latest version of the software, whether it's Mac or PC, depending on the type of model that you're working with there. There's 3 different types. But basically this gives us the opportunity to then run calibration using the software of the screen we're plugged into. Now this could also be connected to, for instance, an external TV or another screen or maybe a projector. And we could likewise calibrate those devices as well with the same physical device. It depends on the software on there as to whether you can do things like projectors or not. So software is plugged in here. I've already booted up the first window. And it gives you a few easy starting points to kick off with, things like making sure that the room you're in is relatively ambient, i.e. stable as far as lighting conditions are concerned. Make sure that the screen you're working on is warmed up. And most importantly, plug the thing in. Now it does say set your display controls, but some of those will be changing as we go through the process. In particular, brightness is something we'll be changing as we work through the software here. And the device itself, once we've plugged it in, has got a sort of clamshell type affair. Effectively, it comes with a lens cap on now, and the whole device, the new Spyder5, is reworked with encapsulated optics, which mean that effectively the optics in here and the sensor array within here is suspended, if you like, in a protective coat, which allows it basically to be a lot more robust. And this is where Datacolor have said that people are working far more on mobile computers nowadays, and so therefore they've re-engineered the device in order to be able to pop it in bags and so on, rather than just be held on a desk in a studio as was the case previously. Likewise, the design of the device is now more curved to allow for the new curved screens. And also the optics have been improved and the sensors array has been improved to work with 4K and 5K screens and other new screen types basically. Key importance with this device is this honeycomb style mesh on the front of the device. Now this allows the light that is being transmitted out from screens to be focused onto the sensor array. And this has been big as far as the improvement of the calibration is concerned here. This was introduced in version 4, the previous version of this device, and allowed some focusing of light and meant that was the top 2 versions of it. There's 3 different versions of the Spyders. The Express is the entry level, Pro, and then the Elite are the 2 more professional levels. But it meant that the Pro and the Elite levels could be used with 4K screens and 5K screens, like for instance the joys of the new iMacs that are out there. But in this case it's been improved again, so the honeycomb has been extended to make it thicker, and the mesh is actually finer in order to focus that light better as far as focusing the calibration device basically. But there, that's enough about the actual physical makeup. Just one point to say that it's got a screw thread on there now as well, so if you are doing things like bigger screens or TVs or projectors, you can actually tripod mount this device and then point it at your screen and calibrate it, as long as the software is driving it from the relevant screen from the computer that you've got attached basically. So we're ready to go. We've plugged the device in. We're going to follow through the software. By the way, there is a new help window on the right hand side of the screen now, which as you scroll over any particular area gives you a little bit more information about the reason perhaps why you'd want to be plugging in the device in this case, but obviously that tends to be a bit obvious. But also gives you more help later on, in particular if you want to move into using the expert console. Very useful to have that help window there. I'm going to use the step-by-step assistant because it's nice and simple to use and works well on sort of standard computers like this laptop. But we do have different options here and an expert console if you want to go into more detail. So clicking through, I'm going to leave most of the standards in here, the recommended standards for gamma and white point as far as the screen is concerned. Brightness, again, actually in this room conditions, it's set for 120 lumens, and that's about right for this sort of level of lighting, basically. And I'm just going to do a full calibration. It takes a few more minutes, but I've already calibrated this device. And of course, we'd recommend that you calibrate your screens on a regular basis as well. If you're doing this as a hobby, you should still be calibrating once every fortnight. But if it's a professional use of the screens and the devices, really every week you should be calibrating, because otherwise your screens will change. There's phosphor in these screens, it's going to go off, it can change in time basically. And it's good for you to keep a track of what's happening with your screens as well. So clicking on there, we're going to go into the next window, which essentially is the hub of the device usage, and that's where we're going to hang the device. We're just going to adjust the lens cap to the right level on the USB cable, hang that over the screen, and then just place that on the screen such that the sensor is pointing at the screen. At this point, we can click on the Next button, and this is where the software will kick in, and it will start running a selection of software patches in front of the eye of the device. Now, it will stop us at one point to just check the brightness levels. It will tell us how far out we're from that 120 lumens, which we've set the brightness to be. And effectively what we're doing there is we're trying to get the whiteness of the screen to match white of paper, basically, so that if later on you're looking at images and you're wanting to print those out, that's where you're trying to match and get ahead of the game to match to that finished proofing or output onto print, basically. So this is where we need to come back in and check our brightness levels. And it tells us here that the current value is 246 candelas. So therefore we're going to reduce that down to try and match that 120. So we're going to pop down the brightness on our screen here and just update that to see what sort of effect that's had on our reading. Gone a bit too far there. Update that again. And that's pretty much within parameters, so therefore we're going to go with that. It's just a little bit out, but for the sake of this demonstration, you get the gist. And at this point, we're just going to click on the continue button, and it will then carry on scrolling through the different color levels. And the eye of the device is actually reading those colors. It knows what those colors should be, and it's creating a little map or a profile, basically, as to what colors are being displayed. And also, B, it'll correct that calibration as well. So let's click on continue and off we pop. Cool, so there we are. We've now done the calibration. So very simple, didn't really have to do much, did we? And at this point, if we just click on finish, it just takes us through the last few stages of the process. Just pop that to one side again. In fact, I'll pop the lens cap on just to protect the optics, make sure we don't get any dust in there as well. Effectively, what we're at now is we're at the stage where it's the device, the Spyder, has actually calibrated that screen. It's run that calibration, and it knows what colours the screen can display at the moment. As soon as we hit the save button, it will actually adapt that display down to display those colours in the true international standard. Now, this international standard is the ICC standard. It's the International Colour Consortium standard. And this is something that a whole bunch of different manufacturers, the Apples, Adobes, Microsofts, have all got together and created that standard, essentially saying what certain colours should look like, should appear like on screens. So as soon as I hit that, you'll see it potentially change the way the screen is displaying. Just before we do that, at this point we need to actually give perhaps we have multiple displays we're doing, so therefore we might want to give a different name to the display before we hit save. But we probably want to give it a date as well. So if we pop in here, Monday for want of a ubiquitous title. And then at this point we can also choose how often we want to recalibrate. Now, as I say, you should be doing this really, if you're doing this professionally, once a week. So we'll switch that to once a week. And then we'll hit the save. And there you may have seen a slight change in the display, but now we can actually see in more detail what sort of display changes we're actually getting here to go from a calibrated to an uncalibrated fashion. So this is the Spyder Elite software, which is the top of the Spyder5 range, basically. And with that, you can go into full screen mode. You can also do that on the Pro. But in the Elite, you can actually choose your own images as well, as opposed to just using these standard sets of images that are supplied with the software. But by clicking the space bar, you get to see the difference between the before and after. So with any of these quadrants, you'll see here a change in the color, but also if we come out of the full screen view, we can actually zoom into different quadrants or in particular images. Again, we can go into full screen mode if you want, and then see that before and after. You're seeing obviously a big change here between the reds in particular. So we're seeing that the calibrated view, which is what we're looking at now, is a lot more red, a lot warmer basically than the uncalibrated view. So something that quite often the case where you've got more of a bluey, cooler cast on modern displays. So of course what we're trying to correct for here is if, for instance, we were working on this particular stills image and retouching it, and if we wanted to send this out to print or to a colour managed environment, you know, for a TV advert, whatever it may be, then effectively if we sent this at the moment, we'd probably think it looked a bit washed out. What we want to avoid is our thinking, okay, it looks washed out, let's increase the saturation, increase the red, because actually it will look like this calibrated view if we send it to a calibrated printer or output device. And so therefore if we've increased that saturation, of course that will have made that look even more oversaturated, so it will have mucked up that image and also wasted your time, because it could be that you're happy with that image as it is, basically. So that, as I say, that's where we get the opportunity to try, for instance, our own images as well, so we can go into any custom images if you want to choose those. But at this point, as soon as we've done that, we can move on to the final stage, which is giving us the opportunity to compare our screen today with how it looked, for instance, previously. And this is why it's important to drop in that date onto our screen. So we've already got choosing the calibration there, which is telling us it's 99% of sRGB. If we compare that with Adobe RGB, we'll see that that's about 76% of Adobe RGB. But I can compare that with other displays or other times when I've recorded or calibrated this particular display on different days. So if I go back to that same display slightly on a slightly different day, slightly different lighting conditions, we're getting a subtle difference in lighting conditions. In fact, that may not have been the same display, because that seems to have gained colour since then, so it's probably one of my other displays basically. But as long as we are giving a correct name and date to it, you can track those different displays over time basically and see how things are appearing. And in particular here, as we're looking at this graph basically, the one last thing to draw your attention to, because our display we've now calibrated and we know can only show about 76% of Adobe RGB, it tells us what we really should be doing is not retouching or not working within an Adobe RGB color space. We're seeing on this display roughly 100% of sRGB, so it tells us straight away, okay, I should be working in sRGB on this display, because otherwise I'm going to be starting to retouch colors that I can't actually see. So for instance, my lighter greens, as you can see on the little map here, the little graph here, are out of gamut. I can't actually see them on this display. So if I'm working in Adobe RGB where actually the gamut of Adobe RGB covers those lighter greens, and I start working, maybe I'm retouching a landscape scene, trying to adjust the greens in the trees and so on, then basically I'm going to be adjusting stuff that I can't see. So key thing here, get to know what your displays can display. One of the first things you do get from calibrating anyway, you get that knowledge of your display capabilities. And then of course, once you've got that knowledge, you're also working on a calibrated display. So just adjust your workflow to the right sort of working environment. So as discussed, there's three different types of Spyder5. There's the Express, aimed at the entry level, and effectively, as you can see, the differences here between the Express, the Pro, which is the next one up, and the Elite, which is the top of the range, are actually visually not very much, because as the packaging would suggest, it's actually the same device that's being used in physically as far as the hardware is concerned in all cases here, in all the models. But effectively, the difference is that in the Express level, we don't have the ambient light sensor. That's that little white dot just under the Spyder5 label on the back of the device there. That isn't working, it isn't enabled for the Spyder5 Express. The Pro has got that enabled and has other extra features within the software basically. and is probably the most popular with professional photographers. The Elite is really aimed at graphic studios and allows you to do a tuning of your images or your displays rather, such you can get all of your displays to match absolutely, basically. So if you've got, say, multiple displays of the same type, but they're all slightly different, have a slightly different gamut, then you can tune them to make sure that they all match exactly. So if you're working on, for instance, the same magazine or production, you can ensure that everybody's looking at exactly the same type of version or same view of the same colours, basically. So that's the different versions. So there we go. We've calibrated our screens. We've got to that situation where we're in a nice scenario of knowing what our screens can display and we know what we're working with. The benefit with the new Spyder5, we're actually seeing these devices now giving up to 55% improvement on calibration of older screens as well. And that's all down to that honeycomb focusing that light. It's cutting down on extraneous light. So where you've got some displays which have got a big glass bezel at the front of them and has a lot of light scatter which can affect the accuracy of your results, this new honeycomb design is actually really helping on making sure you get that focusing of the light. So therefore, we're now in a nice calibrated scenario. Hopefully you can be too.